Hey everybody, welcome back to our interview series. My name is Dr. Shan from Vitality Chiropractic. As part of this interview series, I'll be interviewing other people in healthcare, talking more about how they got started, their stories, and of course, the people that they help. Today's guest is Kake. Kake coaches people to help them make emotional transformations using TRE or tension and release exercises, which targets stress stored in the body. Good afternoon. How are things going?
I'm pretty good. Glad to be here. Yeah.
Oh, thank you for joining me. So for anybody who has not visited a TRE practitioner before, how would you explain TRE to them?
Well, two things where you're looking at one. I'm a practitioner. Um, TRE actually stands for a few things. One, the T can either stand for tension release exercise, or actually it started off as a trauma release exercise. And I think the word trauma, at least to us urbanites, who's never been through severe physical shocks and all that, trauma seems like a very big word. But trauma actually also means pent up stress. Okay. So to give it, I'm jumping the gun a bit, but to give it a shot as to what it actually looks like physically, essentially what we're doing is we are reactivating a shaking mechanism in the body. And the shaking mechanism is tied in with the nervous system. And actually, the point of TRE and the shaking mechanism of the body is to moderate the nervous system so that it becomes parasympathetic, otherwise, also known as to keep it in a calm state. Um, we go through daily living on a nervous system that either goes on a sympathetic bell curve or parasympathetic, which is at the other end of the scale. I'm not saying that we should not have stress. In fact, stress pushes us on and gives us an impetus to perform. And that stress is actually good for us. The main problem is when the stress doesn't come back down after it's gone up. And I think what TRE does is to help that process to bring it back down to a balanced keel. And that's basically what it is. It's making sense.
Yeah,
But
absolutely.
yeah, but essentially TRE is about reactivating a shaking mechanism in mammals, if I could use that word. Um, I don't know if you've seen. Well, I've had a pet dog before, and I used to always wonder when I was much younger why during a thunderstorm the my dog would actually shake violently, almost as though I'm looking at her thinking, gee, are you gonna drop dead or something? Because you're like really shaking uncontrollably. And yet after the thunderstorm, she goes about her business like nothing ever happened. That's the mechanism we're talking about. And you probably might have seen it in your pets. These are inbuilt in mammals. And what's happened over time is that um, we've learned to stop ourselves from shaking because it looks bad. And I think that at the end of the day is not really a good thing. But social conditioning and social upbringing and expectations and how we should behave or not behave has dictated that as an adult we do not shake. But if you notice, children do shake. When they're frightened, when they're scared, when they got shocked, they're going to, they're going to the shake. And I think at various points in our lives, we have experienced that shake too. The nervousness when you're on stage, trying to address an audience, for example, if you're so inclined to have jitters when you're on stage and facing a large group of people, and you find that the sheet of paper you're holding is shaking, that's part of that mechanism. And if I go a bit into a little more technical in its description, you're actually letting the body release the cortisol that is generated because of the stress or the shock. And if you're running for your life in a life or death situation, your cortisol is released. But it's when you are in an urban situation, you're faced with an extremely challenging client or a challenging situation in the office, there's no way to run. You're kind of storing and keeping it all inside your body. And what that does is that over time, when it's stored, the cortisol creates this, because there's no way out for that energy to go, it stores up and doesn't allow your nervous system to get back to a parasympathetic level. Am I talking too much?
No, not at all, not at all.
Yeah, so I'm jumping the gun a little bit, but that's in a nutshell what it is. There's a lot more technicalities in terms of the nervous system, which I don't think I will go through right now because it's going to be too complicated. But I'll just leave it at that. It works on the nervous system, brings it back down to a even keel, where you are calm and you're able to communicate effectively and be the best of who you are.
To be honest, actually, I'd be happy to get more into the nervous system and neurology. I mean, the whole purpose of chiropractic is to work with the nervous system. I specialize just in the brainstem. So I would love actually to get further into that.
Okay.
Before we go any further, I was wondering, in terms of the actual technique, then you mentioned about shaking. I know it's something you mentioned about, say, people who are, in shock, children, they have this shaking mechanism. How would you then elicit that in a patient?
Okay, that's part of the whole exercise. That's part of the whole initiation, if I can call it. So what happens is that you go through a series of what I call pre-warm-up exercises. The point is to induce fatigue in some of these muscle groups, so that you can induce a shake. And there are 7 exercises which go through like all the way from your feet right up to your upper body. But of course, the main muscle groups you want to fatigue would be your quads and around the hip region. Those will be the main muscle groups you want to fatigue, because those are the ones that you are probably holding the tightest. So we want to fatigue those so that it can start to allow a shaking motion to happen. So it's a bit like, okay, you've been to the gym, right? You've done squats, right? So it's like you've done squats, and you've done squats to a degree where you can't do it anymore. And the funny thing is, when you go to the bathroom, you find yourself shaking, like voluntarily shaking, you can't really stop it. That's the kind of shake we want to induce initially. Because I think as a population as a whole, we hold ourselves very tight. And we don't allow ourselves to relax enough or to let the muscle go enough so that it can move on its own. So there's 7 exercises, and then you go into, okay, the exercise is done lying down, where in most cases it's lying down, unless you're you have physical challenges, like you had a stroke or something, then you would do it. You could do it sitting or some other position. But generally the exercise is done lying down on a mat, and you are in a position where your knees are raised. So your feet's flat on the mat, your knees are raised, and you're lying on the mat facing up. And there are 7 exercises, so-called warm-ups, are designed to help trigger that mechanism. The interesting thing is, once the body has triggered that mechanism, you can, and over time, you actually can just get into the exercise without any warm-ups. That's an eventuality. So you are triggering that mechanism within your body, but initially it will be an induced movement.
Okay. So I know there's been other sort of techniques, whether it's say like tapping, I think it's human potential movement as well, where again, it's about that kind of that physical or even sometimes emotional release. And also some people, it can be something as simple as, going for a run. How would you then compare that to these other types of release?
Okay. Okay, I'm speaking this purely from my personal experience. The main difference is you want to work TRE towards a point where it is induced inside out, not outside in. So if you're running, you're doing physical activity, it is an external catalyst to the inside. Whereas in shaking, you actually induce it from within. So you're shaking from inside out. If that makes any sense.
As a chiropractor, if you talk to anyone who's been to a chiropractor, or sorry, anyone who's definitely studied as a chiropractor, they will talk about above, down, inside out. ADIO is in every single chiropractic book you'll ever read. So I'm very with you.
Great. I hope the audience can understand that too. So you actually want to let the system unwind, uncoil itself from inside out, and that I think is the main difference. Whereas the rest of the physical exercises, for example, the beginning of the warm-ups is actually an external exercise to induce the internal. But ultimately where you want to get to is allow that unwinding to happen by itself from the inside.
So if it's, say, elicited by, say, whether it's stress or, say, a trauma, especially if it's more of a mental or emotional trauma, is there an aspect of talking about that problem as well as the exercises, or is it more focused on the physical release of the exercises?
Okay, that's a very good question, and that's a very, very big point in TRE, is that it's not conscious. The release, you do not work at a conscious level. Because what happens is the stress is stored in the body, in the muscles, and you want to release that muscular stress via the shaking. Brain's not involved. In fact, I think one of the issues, actually one of the questions you put was, what are the biggest challenges when I'm working with a client? And I think one of the biggest challenges, and I think it's quite universal, is that firstly, TRE is not like a mainstream, very common activity. And by and large, most first-time clients or first-time attendees of a workshop would be spending a majority of the time trying to figure it out. And I've had people who are like, my God, I don't know, my body can shake like this. And they're like laughing, or they're like curious, and they go like, whoa, this is interesting. And that's one of the biggest bugbears, if I call it, for the client, is to try and mentally work out what's going on in the body. Now, the release is actually not cognitive. It's unconscious in the physical, because all this stuff has already been stored in the body. You're just finding a way to finally let it go. I had an interesting question once from a client, and she said, "Oh, I'm shaking now like this. Is this related to the incident I had 3 weeks ago, or is this because of this thing that happened to me yesterday?" The other thing is that this release is non-linear. There isn't a consecutive, oh, I'm releasing A because I had A happen to me. I'm releasing B because I had B happen to me. It just happens. And it's futile to try and analyze and figure it out, because you probably won't ever figure it out. If the worst it could do when you do that is it distracts you from actually being involved with that movement within yourself. Yeah, that would be the main thing. Actually, it's non-cognitive, not at all. Actually, I've lost your audio.
That's right. So if we go back to the beginning, what started you on TRE? How did you get into this?
Okay. I think it's my own, something that I was personally looking for as a alternative to an issue that I had. I had a severe slip disc about 10 years, 15 years ago. And I think what that got me to, actually how I got it in the first place, was thanks to overworking in the gym, total lack of stretching, and unbeknownst to me, I was killing my whole body in that process, which I did. And as a result of that, I had to look for modalities that were less intrusive. Firstly, I got to work smarter. Secondly, I was looking for ways that I can relieve the body without having to like stress it unnecessarily, if I could use that word. So that got me on the path to looking at alternative therapies. Like there's Rolfing, there's Feldenkrais, there's TRE, there's Qinei and some of these other modalities. And that, to be honest, when TRE was first introduced to me, I actually didn't like it. I think because I didn't see what the shaking was about. But there was a person who actually ran a workshop like 5 years ago, and then suddenly it clicked for me, and it went like, oh, now I get what this is about. And then that got me really intrigued, and then I started studying a bit about it, and then a lot of that work is self-work for me. Internal realizations, awareness of my physical. And TRE has helped me a lot in terms of getting that awareness physically of what's going on in the body as I communicate it to the therapist or the person who's the facilitator. And that has really built up a lot of information for me to work on, and from there create this awareness, which is something I'm particularly interested in, sort of. But it started that way, so just something that I've added on to the coaching abilities as well. As I see that a lot of the clients tend to have pent up or locked up emotions that will take time to release, and TRE is one way to do it gradually. I must add though, if I go into challenges a bit, I think TRE, like many of these less common methodologies, they work at it's like peeling off a layer of the onion. It's not something that wham happens. Sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. But by and large, it takes time to settle in. It takes time to blossom, as it were, and it takes time for it to unveil itself, and the realizations come in different layers, and that layer, the layering or the unpeeling of the layers, is something that will continuously happen. It doesn't really end.
And so, as well as that unpeeling, then, is there anybody else that you would generally recommend someone seeing, whether it's, I don't know, seeing other types of therapists, psychologists even? Is it something that you generally promote to go through as a collaborative way to work with TRE as well?
I definitely would say yes, because TRE was something that I intended to use as part of a coaching, one of the practices for coachee. So there's coaching, there's TRE as a practice. They could be doing other things. It, to me, is an add-on. It's an add-on. It's something that you can add on for the person to not maybe speed up the process, or the person to actually move a little faster. But actually, I realized now, if I could go into a bit of background about TRE itself, how it came about in the first place, that might help explain a lot of the situation. That might help explain it, yeah. It was founded out by this gentleman called Dr. David Pacelli. Now, he is actually a social worker. He started life as a social worker in disaster zones, war zones, and the like, as a counselor, and as just to help people who have gone through that horror of going through like earthquake or war or something. So few things he noticed. One was that he noticed, let's say, when there's a air raid coming and everybody's running for their lives into a shelter, and once they're in the shelter, he noticed that the children were shaking uncontrollably, and then he noticed that the adults weren't. That got him intrigued to look a little further into that. Now, and as he built up the information and knowledge of this, he also realized that, as a counselor in a war-torn area or a disaster zone, you can only do so much at any one time. You can only counsel one person or a family at a time. So, and you got thousands of people affected. And he was looking for a way that he's able to teach something that people are able to have the same effect of calming down and sorting themselves out through the trauma in a bigger scale. Of course, being a counselor in a war-torn zone, and he's American, very likely that the cultural differences, the language differences, it's going to be very, very difficult to actually meet somewhere in that process. So over time, he developed this trauma release exercise. And it was first used, and you can see this on YouTube actually, it was first used on various war veterans who've come back from war and I think we've read, it's quite well documented that a lot of these soldiers, when they come back, the adjustment period to get back into normal life is very dysfunctional. And they have a lot of physical issues that were a consequence of being at war. And there are stories of how this guy cannot sleep for years. And through the release of TRE, he'd suddenly be able to sleep for 4 hours, 5 hours of very deep sleep. And I think through some of my clients who've gone through the workshops, this is actually what I've observed as well. And they've come back to me and say, how did you feel after the session? And they go like, oh, I feel actually very calm. And I had actually a good night's sleep. I haven't had a good night's sleep in a long time, and I did. So that developed into what it is now, TRE. And interestingly, a lot of the work revolves around body and, this whole consciousness and awareness movement. So it somehow is a way in for us to take a look at ourselves physically and noticing what's happening for us emotionally, physically, like the aches and pains, and just have it more conscious of what's happening. And that's where it's developed too.
Interesting you mentioned conscious. That actually leads to my next question. So what role do you think the conscious and the subconscious play in this? Because of course we all know that children, that I think it's until around 6 or 7, depending on the child, right, that's when they kind of go from being subconscious to becoming conscious. For right, a deer in the woods who has the same stress response to the sympathetic nervous system as we do, they're what we would deem, at least as people would deem, as not being conscious. How big a role do you think that consciousness plays in starting to lose that shaking ability?
I think consciousness allows us to somehow have the opportunity to make a choice. Some of these choices are, at 6 years old, when you become conscious, your choices aren't really choices. They're really more like societal conventions that are expected of you to behave in a certain way, parental tradition, regulation, etc., etc. All these plays a part in how we are fashioned to function well in the social environment. So by and large, what happens is that I think, and this is just a theory for me, we tend to suppress our own unconscious bits, and we learn to mistrust it. We learn not to listen to it, and we learn to ignore it at a lot of times. Because we also, as we develop as social beings, we also put up a, what I call it, well, it's a front at the end of the day, an image that we want to project to the world of who we are. And that image usually discounts all these other things that don't make us look so good. And over time, that shield, we take that shield to be, that's us, that's me, and we forget that 90% of the iceberg that's still underwater. And sometimes we forget and we fail to listen to, my gut told me so, but I didn't listen to it. So in that sense, it's learning to understand that there is an unconscious. And by and large, the unconscious actually runs more of you than your conscious part. And working with that understanding, towards that understanding. Answering the question?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah.
So in terms of, say, the clients, either for your general coaching or for TRE, what kind of common traits do you find that they have? What's kind of like a normal client or for you?
Actually, it's quite variable, to be honest. But I think one common thread I do find with a lot of the clients is that the word stress has been overused, actually. Where an understanding of the word stress has so many connotations to it that you don't really know what the definition is. And someone may say they're stressed, but I need to ask a lot more questions as to like stress, how physical, mental, what's going on. And by and large, that body awareness is like, hey, what's happening? Have you noticed what's happened? What happens to your body when you are stressed? And by and large, you can't tell me. I mean, you know the word stress, but what's your definition of it, and where are you feeling it? And there's this, I notice a lot of clients. Now, I would tell clients, you need to get in touch with where it's appearing in your body, because if you have an emotion, and stress does add to an emotion because you become depressed, it leads to a lot of things. There's very little body awareness. That tends to be one trait that I notice. The other trait I've noticed too, that that protective shield around themselves takes a while to break down, because it becomes so tight to hold that part. And I say that for myself too, because I realized through this work that sitting with the experience of the trauma and looking at where it could possibly have originated from has brought a lot of insights in terms of like, could it be that I was always running on attitude of anticipating the unexpected? Now, you know what that does, right? So you're always on fight or flight mode. Your adrenals are overrun. Your muscles are very tight. The digestive system goes haywire because your whole system is ready to run and everything else shuts down. Now, that is what I call stress. But that's not something you will associate with stress. If you're tight, your body's tight, I'll go exercise to go stretch. But there's a much deeper innate thing that's happening within the body. And I notice a lot of the clients actually are tight, but they don't know. And the other thing too is they expect a magic wand to undo years and years and years of this conditioning to create what you are now in terms of your tightness, your shoulders forward, your stiff shoulders. Takes a while to unwind. It's not going to happen in half an hour or 1 hour. It probably will take a few years. I think as a chiropractor, that's pretty much what happens too. Yeah, I guess that's some of the things I find with the clients.
Absolutely. I mean, we get these cases every so often where someone has this change of 20 years within 2 weeks. It does happen, but majority of the time it takes time. It does. It's just it's part of our nature. It's interesting because you mentioned about the start of how TRE was discovered. It was in war zones, especially when it comes to talking about the sympathetic and parasympathetic systems. There's a colleague of mine that always used the example of being in a war zone. That when the bombs are coming over, you go inside to a bunker and you hide. That's parasympathetic. You're protecting yourself. But then when you go back out, sorry, that would be your sympathetic. You're protecting yourself. When you come back out, you're rebuilding your house. That's when you're in that parasympathetic drive. But you can't do both at the same time. It's one or the other.
It's one or the other. But I think I'll stretch that a bit if I could.
Mhm.
is that you're running for shelter, and that's parasympathetic because you've calmed yourself, you're safe, you feel safe. I think the word is safety. But you cannot deny that what happened before in that running towards and the destruction of your home does something internally to you. You've lost, there's a sense of loss, there's a sense of uh, um, identity, there's a loss of identity, there's a loss of physical, there's a loss of life, there's the emotional, physical impact that will stay with you even as you build your house. And I think that's the part that we are looking at addressing.
So I understand you have a busy patient list, and I know you speak publicly. What do you think are some of the most important factors of your success?
I read that question. I'm going like, how? The first thing that came up for me was, I think it's important for one to be in a work in progress. As in, like, as I'm imparting information, I too am in the process of continually in that growing and finding things and growth and unveiling. And still, the onion hasn't been totally peeled yet. I don't think it ever will. It's just that there are things that will continually to crop up. And I think that helps me to be empathetic, be able to sit in someone's shoes and be able to understand what someone else is going through, and be able to. I think one of the things about being a coach is putting my own stuff aside, but being able to be of service to the person or the group of people in a way that I put my own judgment out of the way, and being as neutral as possible to find a solution that will move the group or the person forward.
I mean, I agree. I think mastery is a journey. It's never a destination. It's never
Absolutely.
something to truly ever really reach. In t-
Absolutely.
so in terms of, say, for the way that you're practicing now, and in terms of your coaching, what kind of goals do you have at the moment?
Actually, to be honest, I would like to work with more PRE. It's a way. Okay, there are many things around this. I think one of the things I'm looking at for myself, um, and I noticed this was happening for myself. Now, in terms of TRE, I'm looking at investigating further how I can work with myself to actually bring that nervous system to function healthily and in a very calm state, um, especially when I have to be in front of people, and noticing what other parts of my body need to be worked in order for me to improve in that area. Sound and voice is a big thing for me, and I've been noticing that even there's a tinge of tightness and nervousness in the body, something happens to the voice. And I'm studying and working a something deeper in that respect to see how I can work with somebody to open that voice out by calming the system down at some level. So that's some of the things that I'm looking forward to exploring right now. Yeah, I guess that's the main thing right now.
And in an ideal world, what kind of changes would you like to see, either say within your own profession or within healthcare systems in general?
My big wish is that people in general can become more open to, when nobody knew what Pilates was, when nobody knew what TCM was, and there was this resistance, there's this, oh my God, there's this suspicion. And my big wish is for people to be open to exploring all these other things that are available. for them. And my biggest wish too is that people allow themselves to work themselves so that they become better people physically, mentally, um, and okay, this is a heavy statement, but it's like stop pretending and be yourself. That's one big thing that I wish very much for, that people can be able to express in their true authenticity.
No, I agree. I've seen it, unfortunately, not just even in personal lives, even in business, where the idea of keeping face, not just here, but in lots and lots of places, seems to be a very, very big proponent. And that carries on into someone's personal life as well. They have to have this image of who they are, but they don't really necessarily know exactly who they are themselves, to be honest.
Exactly, because you are not, okay, there's you and there's a job, there's a profession, there's a title, la la la, whatever. So you are not your job title, you are not your position. There's you, and then there's this other stuff that's happened. But I think the sad part is, for many, um, their whole definition of who they are revolves around what they do and what position they are in and what their role is. Because once you take this away, suddenly there's nothing. And that's where it gets pretty dire. And I think my wish is for everybody to be able to fully um, embody what they're here for, fully express what they want to do, and everything is from body to mind are in line and going in the same direction.
I think especially now, there's definitely a huge possibility and movement towards that. People are at home, they can't do some of the things which may detach themselves, such as being around some of the people which they may have to express that external view to. They don't have to go to the malls, they can't go shopping, they can't do a lot of those things which would just cement that idea. For these people that are then working at home, and I mean for people in general, what kind of tips or advice would you give people who are now coming out of this circuit breaker, hopefully in a few weeks?
Well, actually, when circuit breaker was in force, I was thinking, wow, there's no better time to start working on yourself, But actually, that's not where a lot of people want to go, because you want to get distracted with Netflix, you want to get distracted with many things, getting busy with the kids, and la la la, all that. And I found myself doing that too. And I think what people can do as to get out of this is that, well, I hope that during that time in circuit breaker, that they allow themselves to get a little more conscious of how they are functioning. And my wish is that they take that little bit of whatever they've learned about themselves and take it with them out back in the world, and be a more compassionate, be a more open, and be a more conscious being as you interact with others. And it's interesting that, okay, this is almost like the opposite side of this. All those incidences that we've been seeing in the papers about how people are flaring up and things are happening and screaming and fighting and refusing to put on the mask. Actually, I think that's part of the true nature showing up. And it's something to look at, really. And it's something to look at and not make a judgment on it, but come to a certain realization of what lurks in the shadows, if I could use that term. This is really a psychological shadow work, if you know what I mean. That's a very Freud, I think it's Freud or somebody who worked a lot about working things that you don't want to present yourself as a certain way, but somehow those stuff shows up. And something to deal with at the end of the day. And people, I just wish people when they come back, would be a lot more conscious and conscientious.
I think sometimes the people that act out as well, I mean, sometimes we make the most judgment and act out against the things that we don't like about ourselves. So it's kind of, they see the people flouting and say, oh, it's because I would do it, but I can't be angry at me. So let's be angry at somebody else instead.
Yep, absolutely.
So as well as, of course, the advice for other people, say if you could talk to yourself, say 10 years ago, what kind of advice would you give to yourself?
I wish I started all this then. I started all this in 2002, actually, so that's like 17, 18 years. So um, if I told this 10 years ago, I would have said, gee, I wish I had a clearer direction at that time so that I would be much further afield right now. But then life's a journey, so in fact, the big statement I always make for myself is, why did you start earlier on this? Why did you start earlier on that? Think of where you might be. Why did you choose that and not this? And turns out to be a whole series of what ifs. And I guess I just need to take it where it is right now and move that forward. I mean, there's a reason why it's moved the way it has. Choices aside, I truly believe that one will reach that point where he's supposed to. Yes, there have been deviations because of certain choices one makes. But I think at the end, the realizations, the work on self, does point me back to where I think I should be going.
Well, thank you, Kake. I just want to say thank you again for joining me today. Thank you everybody who's been watching as well, either watching this live or watching on the replay. If you have any questions, I'll make sure that I tag him into the post as well. So if you can always ask him if you have any questions more about TRE or even the coaching as well. Or if you have any questions for me, again, you can put them into the comments, or you can call 8438-9550 or help@vitalitychiropracticcentres.com. Thank you again for joining me today.
Okay, thank you, Shan.